Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my two guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hello, Arnie.
No
Good to be
worries.
with you again.
Pleased to have you too, Robert. And welcome, Wallace Klinck.
Hi there, Arnie. It looks as though natural law has forgotten us this year because we don't seem to be having any winter at all.
Ha.
There's hardly any
Well,
snow, and
Yeah.
it's
I spent all afternoon throwing snow, so it's not the
Okay.
same on the country.
No worries. So it is variable across Canada, and so it is in Australia. We're starting to warm up. We're in the low 30s, with a threat of higher temperatures over a couple of days. But then the rain is coming in a few days'
hmm,
time. So it's the summer is, in my view, is mild and nothing like what we're used to. And to me, that corresponds with the sunspot activity, the solar flares that are emitted from the sun, being, if you like, the most dominating influence over the warming of the planet. But of course, if you can follow computer models, you would think it was something else. And that to me is very important, is that sometimes the most obvious is there for you to reconsider rather than listening to what's coming out. Now, I'm going to cut across to websites and news services from around the world in order for us to consider. The first one, of course, front page of the Australian, is Anthony Fauci is there, and is obviously he's going to have a stronger influence, a stronger presence under the Biden administration than he did. If you didn't think he had enough power under Trump, you wait to see. And that's really what they're saying. And I want to go straight across to Natural News, Mike Adams, because I think this is important. That this article here, vaccine skeptics are now being labelled part of extremist groups in the latest merger of Big Pharma and the police state government. Now that's a really important leading towards article, because I believe that Epoch Times has nailed it in this article here, that the ideological alignment pushing America towards totalitarianism, experts warn. Now this is Epoch Times. I think they've got it right. I think they've got it right, that this is actually a coming together, not only of if you like, political affiliations, but also a coming together of big pharma, big government, big industry, and of course, in the middle of it, if you like, the handmaid of finance is big media. And that to me is what we're being bombarded with, to the point where we can't actually rationally think. We're looking at projections. We're looking at, if you like, in the climate argument, we're looking at this, we're looking at that. We should be all cowering under the table. But in actual fact, the weather is quite kind to us, and the variability is less. So to me, we've got to actually take a step back and start coming to grips with the real world. And in the real world, there are relationships of individuals. They come into association, firstly in a family, friendship, then family, and then of course extending it out into the community. And then we form, if you like, city-states and then governments, and the justification for governments. And so it really is important to start thinking about these things, because it's on this basis. It's on this basis that we're actually, each nation, Canada, America, England, Australia, are all experiencing a directional step towards totalitarianism. And it doesn't really matter. You call it fascism, which is essentially run by corporations, or you call it communism, which is a dictatorial totalitarianism from supposedly a single entity. But in actual fact, my understanding of communism is such that they are oligarchs at the apex, and those oligarchs are generally bankers, central bankers. And then on the basis that they own all of the assets of a nation, they just administer it to their benefit and to the detriment of the individuals in that nation. And that's what we're seeing happening in Australia, in Canada, in England, in America. We're seeing it happen in the free world. And we really need to take a step back and reconsider the lessons of history and what it is to talk about the subject I think is important, and that is civics. Civics, the relationship between the individual, community, and, if you like, government and their civic responsibility, which is a two-way street. Your thoughts, please, Wallace Klinck.
Well, absolutely, Arnie. Responsibility is a key factor in life, wherever you are, whatever level you are, whatever activity you're in. If you're not responsible, things are not going to go well. And as I said to someone today earlier, I said, if you may not want to talk about your freedoms or talk about these threats to your freedoms, but if you won't take an interest in what's going on, and if you won't take a responsible attitude toward it, you will lose your freedoms, because the aggressive elements in society will prevail. If you're going to go into regression, retreat, you're going to lose, because those elements are going to force their way. They will have one success, and that will embolden them to test the waters further, and they will continue to encroach upon the freedoms of the average person. And they will not only do that, they will become further emboldened to institute increasingly harsh measures if you don't conform to their particular dictates and concepts of the way things should be done. And so it's absolutely responsibility and responsibility, if you tend to it, can assure you a good life. But if you're not going to attend to it, then you're going to lose that quality of life. So it's not a big imposition. It's not an intolerable burden if you will maintain a responsible attitude to what's going on, an interested, involved, and responsible attitude, because things will be, they'll be maintained in a decent state of order. But if you let go of it, if you vacate the field and leave it to the ambitious people in society, watch out, because you're in for big, big trouble.
Thank you for that, Wallace. That's an interesting opening salvo, because you've actually touched on, in my view, a very, very important principle, and that is, I would call it leisure. But leisure is not idleness. Leisure is not idleness. Leisure is actually development of your thinking, development of your spirit. If you like, it in a lot of ways, it's I would go back to the original meaning of words. I think the word educate is to actually look at the whole, and this to me is our, if you like, our civic responsibility is to look at the whole, is to look at our relationship with the world and those around us, and is it right that one person can actually dominate over another to the point, and in this case Anthony Fauci, is it right, with such a vested interest where he has the potential of making an inordinate amount of money, that we only look at one option, and that is and this is not vaccination, this is actually mRNA injections are actually the potential to alter your DNA. This is actually a restructuring of your body, which is not the same as your historical thinking of vaccines. And this is what Fauci is advocating, and these other big pharmas are advocating, changing your actual DNA. It's quite a hideous consideration. They have no right to do it, and yet it's full steam ahead with no room for dissent. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, I get the impression sometimes that we're talking about principles, and the action that we're trying to prevent has already largely passed us by. You think that the government in the UK is saying that well over 1 million people have taken this vaccine. Well, that is something that's been injected in people, and we have no idea what the consequences are in the future. And as you say, Arnie, they're pushing ahead with this full steam. Well, I hate to say it, but there are going to be a lot of people who have something in their body that they're going to have to mistrust for the rest of their lives. It's the scariest thing. So, and then Wally was talking about responsibility, but what we would consider our opponents in the battle for freedom have a sense of responsibility. They are responsible for protecting, furthering the revolution. In many ways, they're more responsible than the people who don't want the revolution. They're out there having meetings, and they're out intimidating people on the street and burning down buildings. I suppose that they figure that's their responsibility too, in order to advance their cause. So, I mean, we say that people are not being sufficiently responsible. They're not being sufficiently responsible in resisting what the other people who are being more responsible in the terms that they see the world than we are. So I don't think you can just say that responsibility is the answer. There has to be a criterion beyond that, and you have to have a belief in a purpose of life and the desirability of establishing people in a position where they can make decisions for themselves. So it's I don't know, it's getting me down a bit, I must say. You know, the governments around the world are not encouraging personal responsibility at all. They are at least not in the sense of encouraging freedom for individuals. Often they're encouraging movements that are going to result in the removal of freedoms. So, they're instilling a sense of responsibility. Does the person on the street who calls a policeman because someone is not wearing a mask not act out of a sense of responsibility? They've just got a sense of responsibility to a wrong notion, a wrong cause. So I think before we talk about just responsibility as something that's going to be salvation, we have to recognize that we have to have a purpose for the responsibility.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Robert. That is such a very important qualifier. And I know in the booklet Social Dynamics, Eric and Jeremy, when they developed that course, the establishing, if you like, paragraphs, the very first facet of that teaching of social dynamics was that what is the belief system? What is your belief system? What is your foundational thought? And what do you actually bind back to? And that to me is really, really important. Now, if you're of the view, if you like, of Darwinism, the survival of the fittest, the strong shall rule, you listen to, if you like, pseudo preachers like Jordan Peterson, this is what he's advocating. He's actually advocating a form of Darwinism. He might refer to what would you call it? Not cockroach, lobsters and things like that. But in actual fact, pecking order chooks and things like that. But that's not how people work. That isn't how people work. That people actually, it's the innovative individual who breaks out from the pack. Is not who fits in the box. That's the actual individual who will take society forward. And of course, this is really, we've got to really, really consider this in the course of the, if you like, the evolution of culture, the evolution of society, the development of individuals. I believe that is a correct observation, that we do evolve, our thinking matures, it improves. But on the basis of that, it's taking into account, we've got to take into account the real world. How do things actually work out? And on the basis of, if you like, totalitarian perspective, you actually stifle individual initiative. You stifle the creative spark that is within each person. And so you're actually denying who that individual is. You're denying their, if you like, their reflection of divinity, which is, to me, is fundamental to the Christian faith. The kingdom of God is within you. That is what it says. That's a reflection of divinity. And so on the basis of that, every person wishes to be inside of themselves creative, whether it's baking a cake or building a model aeroplane or building a house or building a city or a state, whatever it is. Every person wants to be inside themselves somehow creative. and they should be entitled to do that. But of course, if you deny that spark of divinity, and you're the only one who has the opportunity of being creative, then you're actually regressing society. And it's this cross-pollination of thinking and diversity of action that causes society to go forward. So I think you really need to consider how stunted and stifled communist nations are. They were so backward. I was reading about China, I can't remember which book it was, and they were saying that a family of 10 was so impoverished they had one pair of trousers, and the woman wouldn't go outside during the day. The man would, because he had to work, and so he'd wear the trousers. And that I found that so disheartening, so frustrating, that there it was, the state of impoverishment. It wasn't something we wouldn't even think of. And there you are, that's what it is. And you go, I went into the, if you like, the Eastern Bloc countries. I did a tour, was it 15 years ago? I did a tour. And there was a darkness to those countries. There was a darkness when you went inside the borders. It was all to do with the barbed wire, the fences, the guards, the armed security everywhere. And honestly, the armed security had a look as if they were prepared to use their weapons. Whereas when I see a policeman in the street in Australia, I'll go up and say hello, and I'll give them a wave, whatever, because they're part of the community. But these behind the Iron Curtain, that was nothing of the sorts. It was so bleak, and that's oppression. That's not the creative spark. That's a denial of the divinity in each individual. Your thoughts, please, Wally.
Well, it's true. It depends on your view of life. If you think that, the essential Christian approach is that you have a special relationship and a unique relationship with your Maker, with God, or whatever word we use to describe that superior intellect or intelligence that pervades the universe, then of course it would be an infraction or a violation for anyone to try and interfere with that relationship, because it's something that inheres in reality. On the other hand, if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe that there's any external authority or guidance, intelligence of the universe, and that it's all left upon you, the full responsibility to look after everything, well, and of course that puts you in a totally different position. Then you have to become the source of authority, because somebody has to run things or make things function, and there's no one else to do it but you. And of course, as a limited human being, you're going to probably make a very minimalist contribution to the successful association amongst human beings, because you just don't have universal knowledge. You just don't have it. And so you really don't know what the purpose of life is. You really don't know what the principles of association ideally are. And you're going to make all sorts of errors, and they're going to be errors that bear upon other people in an oppressive manner and interfere seriously with the quality of life of other people. So, and then you, of course, are going to become quite officious probably about it and domineering, because you think that the responsibility is on you to make things work. And you're going to be inclined typically to regard social failures as due to the weaknesses of your fellow man, your neighbor, your other people. And that's going to make you even more inclined to want to exercise your authority over them. And that is, from a Christian standpoint, a complete overplay or violation of your legitimate function in that sense, in trying to dominate the activities of other people. You're simply not qualified to do it. And when you do, you're going to affect all sorts of errors and injustices, and life is going to be quite miserable. So I think it's Douglas wrote a book called The Big Idea, and it pursues this idea, this notion of centralized power on a world scale, power that is human in origin, not divine, not something that is inherent in the nature of things as such in reality, but in the concepts or thoughts of limited human beings. And that's going to result in a very stultified, inadequate, and probably dictatorial and miserable state for human beings. It just simply isn't adequate. But, I was at a meeting, and my MP actually, and one party was there, and the first thing, he was I think the first to speak, but he was going off on this idea of environmentalism, and he said, they're just going to have to learn. And I had expressed some ideas about human freedoms, and he had made it very clear. He says, I disagree with just about everything you say. Well, you can see that we're approaching things from completely different ideological and moral and ethical standpoints. And he is using this as an excuse, or whatever you want to say, to exercise his will to power. Whereas I expressed the view that I really didn't care to express the will to power over my neighbor or on other people, because I thought that they were given the right to do that themselves, and they're probably better expert on looking after their own affairs than I would be. And he, I don't think he'd ever thought that before. He acted as though he was almost shocked, and he didn't say anything much more for the rest of the meeting. And it's really amazing. Some people are tempted and led to get completely beyond their legitimate authority in assessing situations and other people. I mean, if there is no order to the universe, that is a rather incredible conceptual framework to operate from, because after all, we are Johnny-come-latelys. The universe has been here for we don't know how long, and it operates according to certain universal principles. And I don't think that we as human beings can come along and say, well, we're going to replace all this because we know better. And being that we know better, we will force other people to conform to our particular concept of things. This is, in my estimation, a really sick attitude toward life. And it's sick in the sense that it makes life a horror and a misery for everyone else. Because people are they were using authority or claiming authority that they don't legitimately have. And that means that they're going to have not a benign, but a malign influence on the social order, on other people, and in life in general. I mean, there's no substitute for freedom.
Exactly right, Wally. Exactly right.
But freedom can't be exercised in a selfish manner. It has to be exercised in a responsible manner that accords to other people the right to do what you want to do in realizing your potentialities.
Yeah. I think about if you like, the individual attempting to do something and someone stifling them, and even if you like, someone who's in a position of authority who shouldn't be there. They don't actually have the natural ability to be in that position. They don't have the wisdom, the astuteness, and if you like, the calm that goes with that. Their natural ceiling isn't there. So these things to me are really important to recognise. And of course, in the pursuit of understanding something, we might consider, say, constitutionalism, the right to vote. You think the different stations in life, a person may have a view that if I vote for this particular group or party, whatever, I'm going to get the best benefit. And it's limited. The thinking is limited to that. And that benefit may be, well, okay, if I describe that benefit as a bribe, is that an accurate description? Is it a bribe? You're accepting a bribe to vote for them rather than actually considering, are they the right person to represent the electorate? And that is a totally different perspective. And it's in the course of this assessment, if you like, of our own selfish motives, because we do have these selfish motives, and it's in that we actually grow. A young child is entirely nihilistic, entirely self-absorbed, self-centered, and they don't want to share. They don't want to actually get on with their neighbour. But in actual fact, over time, you learn to do all of these things. And you learn to, if you like, hold down a job, be part of a responsible member of a community, and over time these things come with maturity, if you like, and you've got to recognise that and grow with it. That's what I say about evolution, and that's why, to me, leisure, learning, educating is so important. And that's why, if you like, the universities have done such an abysmal job, because they have developed people for craft, for industry, for trade, but they haven't actually developed them for actually looking at the world and being part of the world, being in harmony with the world. It's actually a form of a battle. This is where, if you like, the philosophy of Darwinism comes into it, dominating the world. I think it's inherently flawed, and I think that the dialectics that goes with libertarianism and Marxism, one dominating the world and one wanting to rebuild the world, but it's still that same perspective. It's still that wrong perspective, instead of actually looking at the world, observing the world, and trying to live harmoniously within it. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Jordan Peterson. Well, he's exemplary of the kind of thinking that establishes a standard for all mankind, but it's his standard, and he wants everybody to conform to it. Mm-hmm. This is a common failing of the human mind, because you know what you think you know. You don't know it for sure, but you're willing to impose it on your fellow men and women. Mm-hmm. It's an expression of, I think, egotism, narcissism, and there is no room in it for humility. And humility is a great virtue. You know, humility is looking at the world and saying you don't understand everything about it, but it's a very interesting place, and you're curious to see how it's going to impact on you and how you are going to develop within it. And I think that's the sane attitude, rather than, well, and definitely the sane attitude. Otherwise, you've got all these Puritans running around, and Jordan Peterson is an example of it. Puritans are people who impose their views on others, and when they are given power, they can do that in a very brutal fashion. They're trying to design society to conform to their preconceptions. And it's just a wrong attitude. It's totally devoid of humility, as I say. So, you know, when you relate to other people in a non-sort of judgmental way, then you're accepting that you have your ideas, which you presumably think are good, and maybe really good, maybe the best, but you're admitting the fact that somebody else can have an idea too. And it actually you might have an edge on your idea, or maybe the interplay of your thinking with their thinking will lead to a better idea. But that's not the way the world is working right now. The world is working according to these rigid perceptions and these notions about climate change and disease, and it's all cut and dried. There is no opportunity for dissent to be expressed, or even for skepticism to be expressed. We're being driven down this highway by these puritanical absolutists, and it's definitely the wrong way to go if you are starting from Christian precepts. And, we believe that Christ came to give us some insights into our nature, because we believe, in fact, that Christ has made us. So he knows best how we should be acting and what spiritual nourishment we need. So these people who are imposing all the time are just a constant threat to society. And really, they've become so dominant now that one wonders, how in the world are we ever going to escape from their clutches? They're everywhere, and they're coming from all directions, and it's the opportunity for freedom, for thinking on your own, is being crushed, diminished constantly. And we need some strategies in order to fight this thing, but I think we need primarily a renewal of people's understanding of the purpose of life. And you mentioned leisure, Arnie. Leisure is not just not doing things. It's not sitting in front of a television. Leisure is a state of relaxed mind. You are free from preoccupations about material things. Leisure is a state in which your mind can work freely and not be encumbered by the worries that this current world is constantly trying to impose on us.
Beautifully put, Robert. Thank you for that. I want to actually cut across, before I get back to you, Wally. I want to cut across to some websites and just place some recommended reading. I'll make sure that I put the links there for you. In the first instance is Ian McGilchrist, The Divided Brain. His Master and His Emissary, The Master and His Emissary, is a brilliant book, and it talks about the psychology of the left hemisphere and the actual working of the brain between the left and right hemispheres, and how one side can dominate the other, and it shouldn't. And another book I think that is very important, The English Constitution by Walter, I think it's pronounced Bagehot, and I'm part way through. Bago, is it? Okay. And yeah, Bago, fascinating reading. And then, of course, Leisure with Joseph Pieper, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. I'm about halfway through this book, and I found it particularly interesting, because on the basis of leisure, thinking of what you're actually doing, taking time out to actually develop your thinking is so important. If you are stifling your thoughts to actually just take in what comes to you from the box, if you like, you take it in and you regurgitate it out, is that the limit of your expression? Is that the limit of who you are? And you may choose to do that, and okay, that's fine, but you may consider that, well, where is the opportunity for me to do these things? I don't have the money to buy these books. We've got the League has got the online library, and you can actually order, if you like, a copy of the entire website, which includes the online library and thousands of other documents. And so you can read the whole lot at your leisure. At your leisure on your computer, you can read the whole lot to develop your thinking, so that it isn't stunted, it isn't restricted to just regurgitate what's placed before you on the box, but you actually consider something like constitutionalism, something like common law, something like Magna Carta. Why are these things so important? Why do we have trial by jury and not just by a commissar, by a judge who just pronounces you guilty and determines the fitting punishment based on the evidence before it? I mean, it's entirely different, and that is where we're heading. We're heading towards this totalitarianism. This is where we're heading. The way back, I believe, is to actually don't put your faith in the man, Donald Trump or anyone else. Don't put your faith in them. but rather put your faith in yourself. And that is, develop your thinking, and on the basis of your developed thinking, then talk to your neighbour and discuss these things further. And then attempt to, say, have some influence over what's actually going on in your area, some influence that may be to your benefit. You know, consider these things, because to me, I think they're all important. If you don't actually become active, if you don't actually have enough spirit inside of you to stand up against tyranny, then tyranny will certainly prevail. And this is, if you like, the challenge before us for this generation. It's been faced before. The Christians faced it in the first century. In each war, people as young boys as young as 14 years old have actually marched off to war. They've put their age up in order to get in. They've marched off. They've accepted their responsibility. And to me, the opportunity is before us all to do what we can. And I think if we put our faith in one individual, like Donald Trump, then he can be defeated. Whereas if we put our faith in each other and our faith in the things of God, then I believe we can't be defeated. We can actually overcome what's coming at us. Your thoughts and summary, please, Wallace Klinck.
Yes, Arnie, I do think that, you do your best thinking or reflection when you're relaxed, when you don't feel threatened by external factors. You're merely searching for answers. You're searching for truth, not for power, but for truth. Truth may convey a certain amount of power, but it's truth initially that you should be looking for. And I think that basically most people are anxious. They're anxious about their security. They're anxious about what's going to happen tomorrow. And of course, I think the Christian idea is that sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Don't fret about tomorrow. And that's all very well if you're living in a normal, natural environment. But if you're living in an environment which holds increasing artificial threats to your security, then it's pretty difficult to get into that kind of a relaxed state of mind. And I think that the attitude to which you approach things, your fellow man and so on, the degree of what we call love is absolutely essential to proper functioning of the mind from a rational reasoning standpoint too. So in other words, we should not be in a hyper state worried about tomorrow. We should be confident that we will be provided for, that we are not living in a state of constantly threatened deprivation, that tomorrow things will be there. And, people are hard to convince of this sometimes, but when you consider the tremendous destruction that we have engaged in last century alone, 2 major world wars destroying civilization twice, or the proceeds, the achievements of civilization. We don't just have enough, we have an abundance which there really isn't any room to contain. And if we don't, because we simply choose to destroy what we have, well, whose fault is that? It's not God's fault. It's not nature's fault. It would seem to be our fault. So it just doesn't make sense. We have plenty. And there's no need for fear. They say that fear, love casteth out fear.
That's right.
But we live today in a very, very hyper-sensitized state of fear. We're afraid of what we might be able to have in the way of security tomorrow. We're afraid of a possible another major world war. We're afraid of competition from other nations, which should, if we have so much that we have to compete that much in getting rid of our wealth, we should actually, in balance, be in a marvelous position overall, because we have plenty. But if we're going to make our security dependent upon offloading our abundance on another nation, which is at the same time trying to do likewise, well, we're in a self-defeating mode. It's quite insane. We have too much, and we're afraid. We're afraid because we have too much. In other words, we think that our abundance is a disadvantage to us, and not only a disadvantage, but a major threat. That's one reason why one thing I found quite inadequate in Trump's approach. Trump was quite right about the degree to which the nation is being threatened by external competition and so on. But the thing of it is, Douglas made a crucial discovery. He made a discovery that the problem in the modern world is not our ability to produce. We have solved that problem many times over. We can produce far more than we need. The problem is not in finding positions for people to produce even more. The problem is in finding sufficient ability through income on the part of humanity in general to absorb, to access and absorb what's coming off the end of the production line. In other words, in consumption. We haven't learned how to live in according to our basic potentialities. We have blocked consumption by completely artificial means. That means being a lack of income, financial income, to acquire what is being produced. And we wouldn't have to produce as much of a frequently irrelevant and frivolous and even terribly destructive type of production if we were able to access freely what we already have produced, because we wouldn't be acting under unusual artificial duress. We would simply be producing and consuming and relaxing. But today, the more you produce, the more you have to produce, because you can't access what you produced unless you have the income, and the only way to get it is to produce more. And so you're just up against a situation that is totally unnatural, totally forced, artificial, and damaging. It's a destructive type of situation where you cannot use what you've already produced until you produce something else. And if that situation gets increasingly serious, what you produce in the way of something else becomes increasingly irrelevant and destructive. So, I mean, I think that we are really, Douglas described this quite well, I think, in the development of, in 1918, he wrote an essay and he outlined the delusion of superproduction and the tremendous dangers that lie within that for humanity in terms of future development. And I think we have pretty well hit the wall at the present time with our enormous productive capacity. So, yeah, we have to do some original thinking on that. Very, very creative original thinking.
Thank you for that, Wally. That's very well put, and it does lay it on the table, if you like, that the opportunity is there for a time of plenty. The opportunity is there for a time of leisure, but it has to be we have to actually go against what is currently happening through the media, through big pharma, through big government. We have to go against it. We actually have to go against the grain. We have to step away from the crowd, if you like, the Gadarene swine ready to go over the cliff. We have to step away from it, and we have to think again the relationship between the individual and society. Your thoughts and summaries, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, it's odd, is it not, that the great defect or the great vice in our society is often said to be consumerism. The fact is that there is a deficiency of the means of consuming our own production, as Wally just said. So there are always these psychological manipulators are always accusing society of exactly the opposite of what the problem is. For example, they will say that there is a problem of employment, whereas the fact is that the employment we have is now producing so much that employment obviously isn't the problem, if you regard it as a question of providing material support for the community. The purpose of production is consumption. So there's nothing wrong with consumption. There is possibly something wrong with consumerism because that's obsessive. And that is the result of the installation in people's thinking of an exaggerated acquisitiveness. So the purpose of life becomes just to get a bigger this or a bigger that, and more of this and more of that. But if you do that, in the end, it'll never be satisfying, because satisfaction in life comes from loving relationships and good relations with your neighbors. And in fact, I think if you go throughout the world, you'll find that pretty well all people are very good if you just give them a smile. If you go in with a gun, they're probably not going to receive you so well. But if you go in with a smile, they'll smile back. That's my experience in my travels through the world. So if we solve this problem of distributing the wealth that we have in abundance, it would take all these pressures out of society, and the desire to rise in a hierarchy and acquire authority over other people would not be valued in the same way. I don't think that people want unlimited material possessions. They just complicate your existence. Who wants to have 5 cars? Well, there are some crazy Hollywood people who think that way, but they're winning the competition game in their way of thinking. But ordinary people don't think that way. And if we would just distribute the abundance that we already have, I think all these problems of pollution and perhaps even excessive use of certain resources would resolve, because you would have a society in which people would be content with living not poorly, living well, living with all they need in a material sense, and that would be satisfactory. So if you go into these societies where there's intense competition, I think you find that they're not really very pleasant to be in. And when you go into these societies where all opportunity for human initiative has been taken away, they are grim too. And that is the communist societies we've seen throughout the world. People have tried to escape these societies, and those who have left them managed to get out and gone to societies where personal freedom was to some extent respected, are the ones who today are most concerned about the way the world is evolving. They're very upset. They will say that they recognize in what's happening in Canada, Australia, the United States, throughout Europe, as being reminiscent of the kind of system that communism imposed upon them, that really took away so much of the meaning of life, that in the end, for example, in Romania, people just said, well, kill us, but we're getting rid of this regime, because there was no future for them. Well, the capacity for a future is practically unlimited. We have the most amazing planet to live on. We've been given endless resources, and we must find a way of distributing them. And the man who came up with a practical proposal for this was Clifford Hugh Douglas, with his social credit ideas back in the early part of the 20th century. We can't continue as we're going, because we're going into a world of endless debt, and the way they're offering us to get out of that is totalitarianism. So there has to be another alternative. There has to be what you might call a third way, and that is social credit. It's encouraging leisure for all and material security for all, which is the definition of freedom.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Robert. I was building up to jump in on your last sentence, and that is the entering the leisure age. That's what was being proposed 100 years by Clifford Hugh Douglas social credit. He proposed it. He saw it with advanced control. He saw it with the harnessing of steam energy, converting then to electrical energy. And of course, the increment of association. He saw it. He was responsible for the tube in Britain, the tube, the underground railway systems and that. He was an electrical engineer, a brilliant man. And he could see in the end that robots would take over the working, if you like, they take the burden off the back of man. Entering the leisure age, but it's not an age of nothing. It's actually an opportunity of personal development, of personal individual initiative, of creativity, a spark of genius that is within every single human being, the spark of the divine. And that's the opportunity that's before us. Are we seriously going to lose this golden opportunity in front of us? It's right there. It is. You can smell it, you can taste it, you can touch it. But there are those that would do their darndest to stop it. And it's up to each individual to do what they can. We are doing what we can here. Are you doing all that you can there? Use the systems we've got, use the libraries that we've got, read the books that we've got to develop your thinking, to actually to build within yourself, to cultivate your thinking, to build culture, to cultivate culture within your thinking and your wider community. It's there. It's there. We have an opportunity to enter a time of leisure, a golden age. And
may I just say, Arnie,
Yeah.
may I just say that the ancient Greeks valued a culture of leisure.
Yeah.
It was built on a structure of slavery.
Yeah.
But the Greeks themselves valued leisure. They didn't want to do any work. They thought that they should socialize and discuss and develop their thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And we have slaves today. They're robots. And that technology we have should be sustaining a culture of leisure.
Yeah.
I mean, have we not progressed in the past 2,500 years?
Yeah.
It seems not, because rather than freeing us, the robots are being used to enslave us.
That's right. And just a one-line sentence, Wally. Anything else?
I think, Arnie, we just have to release ourselves. We are slaves. We're mental slaves. We're emotional slaves.
Mm-hmm.
We are slaves to the concept of scarcity,
Mm-hmm.
when it is nothing more than an illusion. It is a monetary illusion. It's something that is held above us as a fearsome threat to our existence.
Mm-hmm.
When actually Our potential is limited by our physical potential. Money is simply an abstraction. It is simply a representation which we use in order to give, reliability and order to our economic relationships. But money should never in any way be a restriction upon us. And that's where the conservatives really fall. They seem to think that if we're having problems, we should cut back on what we're actually doing. We should be doing more if necessary or desirable, and countering this or reflecting it in our accountancy. And that's all money is accountancy. It's just accountancy. It should reflect what we are doing or what we're capable of doing, and should never inhibit us in any way whatsoever. You can't be short of money. How can you be short of an accountancy of what your potentialities or your accomplishments are? How can you be short of a representation? You can be short of a real physical scarcity if that happens to be the case, which is not really the case today. But how can you be, I mean, this is a form of mental aberration. It's a form of mental disturbance. It's a form of mental control. It is a diabolical system of misrepresentation of reality, which gives certain people who have control over money and a completely unwarranted control over humanity, over their neighbors.
Yeah. I want to just want to take us back once more to our website homepage. Part of the ALOR website is our libraries, and in particular this social credit library. And we mentioned it several times, the Social Credit Library. This bloke Butler, Eric Butler, I knew him personally. I was fortunate to actually work under him, study under him. Releasing Reality. This is a booklet that he wrote, and I've just happened to bring it up here, and there it is. It's on our website, 81 pages. You can print it locally if you want and read it, and it really is a summary of what we're actually talking about. Today is about releasing reality. Thank you so much, Robert and Wallace Klinck. This is Arnis Luks at the Crossroads.
Thank you, Arnie. It's a delight speaking about these things.